Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Grace Aldridge Foster here. Hi, Grace. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So let me introduce you really quick, but just to tell everybody, first, we're going to be talking to Grace about email overwhelm and how to get people to open and read emails. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about Grace. She's the co-founder of a writing training group called Bold Type and a teacher of lean communication to U.S. Special Forces at the Brief Lab. So first, actually, before we get into all the email stuff, what is lean communication? And then also I was popping around on your website and I saw something called plain language. So can you just give us a little rundown on those first?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. So I think I'll start by talking a little bit about plain language because plain language, capital P, capital L, is an actual thing. It's an actual movement. And a lot of times I'll ask people, do you know what plain language is? And they'll be like, yeah, of course. It's using simple language. That's plain language. But actually, plain language is a lot more than that. If you go to plainlanguageguidelines.com or .gov, I think it's a government website. It's a set of standards for writing to help government agencies and other organizations communicate to their audiences clearly. So the three aims of the plain language movement are to make sure that your users can find what they need, understand what they find, and use what they find to meet their needs. So plain language is heavily influenced by UX, by user experience. So it's not just about using simple sentences, using a lower grade level, that kind of thing. It's also about making sure that your documents, any kind of document you write, is easily navigable and easy to use for your audiences. So we do teach plain language. My business partner, Casey, and I are both members of the Center for Plain Language, and we do teach workshops on plain language and do plain language review. But even when we're not teaching, capital P, capital L, plain language, we certainly do teach lean communication. And the idea is that, you should leave out the parts that readers skip. That's from Elmore Leonard, and Strunk and White influence us, right? Like omit needless words. That's what we're aiming for when we teach lean communication. And there definitely is such a thing as being too lean, as being too brief. And we try to avoid that as well. So I guess a kind of a key component of lean communication is judgment. How can you use your judgment to strike the right balance between, enough detail, but not too much detail, enough content, but not too much content, that kind of thing.
And then I'm just really curious, what does this have to do with the U.S. Special Forces, or how does that help them? And first, well, let me back up. First, I understand the government aspect of plain language because, well, we need to understand what is going on, and we meaning everybody in the U.S. Who are also immigrants, and maybe English isn't a first language, or some may have disabilities, and we need to be able to find things. And I've heard some news stories about this recently. But then the lean communication with U.S. Special Forces, how do they use that, and what do they do with it?
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, when I first started doing that work, I was sort of comically shocked to realize that, soldiers send emails too. I had no idea. I think one of my first courses was with a group of Navy SEALs, and I just couldn't. I don't know. It's like I had such a hard time comprehending, like, oh yeah, they actually have a lot of the same communication challenges that we have in the business world. The stakes are just higher. I think that the emails I send are high stakes, to potential clients or colleagues or things like that. But I can truly say that not a single email I've ever sent has been life or death, right? But That is
Mhm.
sometimes the case, with the
Mhm.
special forces community. And so, I think especially when teams are deployed and they're overseas, there's a lot of communication happening back and forth between those teams and, um, teams back here in the States and also their partners, in country on the ground. And there's a lot of communication happening back and forth. And so, yeah, those emails that they send, those reports that they write, they're all really high stakes, and they often get passed up multiple levels, from person to person. So someone maybe, just writes a simple report about, a particular day when they're deployed or something, and it gets passed up, to the Pentagon, right? So the stakes are sometimes higher. And so they engage the brief lab, a company I contract for, to help them write, direct, clear,
Hmm.
brief communications.
And then do they more veer on the side of being too brief or too verbose?
Oh, yeah. I would say they err on the side in the military, in my experience, of being too brief. Yes. So, well, you really have two types, right? You have people who kind of, it's stream of consciousness. It's kind of just, they don't edit is really the issue. And this is true in industry as well, but, they don't edit. It's stream of consciousness. It's, every single step that happened, or it's kind of super terse and there's actually not enough detail, and it leads to a lot of back and forth. So it's just that there's a lot of both extremes, I think. In the military, and I don't want to speak for the entire military. I'm not
Mhm.
qualified to do that, but there is pressure sometimes to document every little thing. There needs to be a document of everything that occurs. And so one challenge that happens with that community is how do we document thoroughly without overwhelming our audiences with the amount of detail that we're providing?
Mhm. And it's just interesting because we do have the same issues working with clients sometimes, because I saw
Yeah.
on your website something about how, if you spend time creating a good document, you might think it is actually taking you too much time, but in the end, it will save time.
Yes.
Because if,
Yes.
like some clients can just send us like a little brief thing and it's like, okay, well, let's go here. We're going to have some questions. Let's do it. So anyway, just,
Absolutely. Some extra time up front saves you and your client and your audience a lot of time down the road. And so I always think that a little extra time and care up front, a little effort on your part saves your reader effort. And it actually makes it more likely that they can respond or act in the way that you need them to. You get to your outcome quicker. And
mhm.
who doesn't want that?
Well, and also if you're with a team and you're trying to save your team's time because your team's time is your time, then I've just noticed editing, even just what you'd think is just a minor email, editing it before you send it to your team member can help, because you do want that to be straightforward and easy to understand. Otherwise, that team member is going to think about it until they decide, oh gosh, should I reach out to her or not? Sometimes they don't want to bug. So, yeah. So anyway, let's talk about email. I saw that you recently had something about email overwhelm and how we can just not have it.
Absolutely. I mean, email is we're primarily a training company. Bold Type's primarily a training company. And email is probably our most requested topic. And I think it's because it is such a pain point for every working professional. I mean, even if you use, Slack or some other type of messaging service, you still do have to send emails. And even if you don't send that many emails, a lot of the problems with email carry over to things like Slack. Anyway, email is such a common pain point. So we get asked about it all the time. And at the beginning of every email workshop we teach, we kind of poll participants and we say, tell us what's wrong with email. Like, this is your chance to complain a little bit, to air your grievances, tell us all your pet peeves about email. And it's a great icebreaker because absolutely everyone has an opinion, everyone has an answer, and often like strong opinions, passionate opinions, but we hear the same things over and over and over. People receive too many emails. They're too long. They're not relevant to them. The subject lines are misleading. They don't know what to expect when they actually get into the email. There's no clear takeaway, no clear outcome, no clear action step, no clear ask. And when you look at the volume of emails that people are receiving, if it's, I can't think of the latest stats, but it's hundreds a day on average. If every single one of them, or if the majority of those emails are not clear, it's not clear what you're meant to do or how you're meant to respond or even what the point is, you're spending so much of your day in your inbox and it's wasted time. It's incredibly frustrating. And if you look at, the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Atlantic, there are all these think pieces over the past couple of years from prominent writers saying, email's making us miserable. Email's ruining our lives. It's ruining productivity. So it's this really common pain point. And yet we have to use it.
Mm-hmm.
There's really no getting away from it. So what we try to do is, by the end of our workshops, we want people to feel like they have very clear strategies for sending fewer emails, sending
Mm-hmm.
emails that get opened and get read. Just getting your email opened is the first hurdle, I
Mm-hmm.
think. I certainly delete plenty of emails without ever actually opening them because it
Mm-hmm.
seems so clear from the sender name and the subject line, the preview text, that it's not worth my time or it's not relevant. And so, yeah, our goal is that they finish these workshops feeling like they have a set of tools to reduce email overwhelm for them and for their audiences.
Okay. So working with the actual writer of the email and telling them possibly how to do it better can help everybody with the receiver of the email with their overwhelm, is kind of your thought.
Absolutely. Like, I think the responsibility starts with you as the writer. You can't ultimately control how many emails come into your inbox. I mean, of course, there are things you can do, like setting up automatic rules and filters and things like that. But what you can control is the way you send emails. And
Yeah,
I think
and it can, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, it can reduce, I mean, you're probably just going to say this. It can reduce the amount of email you receive back if you send a clear
Yes.
email to begin with.
Exactly, because someone doesn't have to respond and say, "Can you clarify?" Or, "I thought we were going to talk about X in that meeting," or, or they just misunderstand, and so their response is not actually useful or relevant. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, there's that, or it's like, well, okay, so if we can't email about this, let's just get on the phone. And nobody wants a phone call these days. So it's like, choose your poison. Like, what do you
Yeah,
want?
that's right. That's right. If you want to avoid phone calls, then send good emails,
Yeah.
and you're less likely to have to get on that phone call. Exactly.
So, can you talk about clickable subject lines and how to do them, and then also maximizing preview text?
Oh, yes. So I'll come back to preview text, but I'll first say that I think is the most underutilized real estate in the inbox.
Hmm.
Most people just don't pay attention to it when they're writing, or they don't think about how they can control it. So I'll come back to that. But with subject lines, the problem that I see most often is that people will give just a theme or a topic for the email, but there's no sense in the subject line what action someone is supposed to take on that topic, how it's relevant, how that particular email is relevant to the recipient. They're rarely verbs and subject lines, right? Like there's rarely an action word in them.
Hmm.
um, and some people have a problem with writing subject lines that are too long and then the inbox cuts it off. You don't actually get the full subject line, but more often I see people giving subject lines that are too short. It's just you're kind of phoning it in. It's 2 or 3 words and it's just a theme or a topic. It's giving a flavor of what that email might be about, but no clear prediction of what that person's going to find in there. So I think being as specific as possible, including verbs, including going ahead and if you have a question, say that you have a question and include a question mark in the subject line. I'll often use like a plus sign if I'm emailing about two related things or want simple responses to two questions. I'll include symbols or punctuation, to go ahead and signal that. I also want to make it really easy for people to search for my emails in their inbox. And so when you include really descriptive subject lines, it helps people to do that, especially if you email back and forth a lot. And then one of my favorite tactics for clickable subject lines, but also emails that people will respond to, is actually to include the amount of time that it will take for them to do the task that you're asking them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, that I email you, Amy, and I say, hey, can you review this, article that I wrote? I want to get your opinion about it. You're going to see that, and I mean that's too long for a subject line. But if I send you and I ask for something like that, you're going to think, oh, that sounds like a really long task. That seems like that's going to take a lot of effort and time. I'm really going to have to dig into that. I'm busy. You may open that email or you might not. You might say, you know what, I'll come back to that later. And we all know that when you say I'll come back to this email later, we often don't. But if I said, 2-minute ask, 2-min ask, look at this, paragraph or article, question mark or something, then, you're going, oh, I have 2 minutes. Maybe you'll even do it right away because it feels good actually to do a 2-minute task and complete that. You're kind of giving people an easy win, but you're also signaling to them how they can slot that into their workflow for the day, So that's one of my favorite hacks.
Well, I do like that, but what if I don't know. I feel like you mentioned something about being misleading. What if that isn't going to take 2 minutes? Like it's not. I mean,
well, right.
Especially in our work in PR, which we do, right? If some random person emailed me and said, this will take 2 minutes just to review my writing portfolio. Let's say 10 minutes to review my writing portfolio. It's like, okay, really? You have no idea how I read. But anyway, that's just a really specific example.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, it can't be clickbait, right? You can't pull a switcheroo on people. You can't say this is a 30-second task and it's really a 30-minute one because that degrades trust between you and the recipient, and it's going to damage not just your email communication back and forth in the future, but your working relationship too. So, yeah, you definitely want to be very confident that your ask is accurate if you're doing that. But there are other ways that you could adapt this piece of advice. Like one thing I like to make very clear in subject lines is like the level of urgency or the timeliness of something. If I need you to review, or I'll talk about, myself, my business partner, if I need her to review something and it's time sensitive, I need to tell her it's time sensitive. And I don't need to wait until she opens the email to see that. I need to go ahead and say in the subject line, review and get back to me by, end of day.
Okay.
Right? Or
well,
before
so then my
1
problem, so dealing with an ADHD person, which is me, which is the problem because that's going to be, if we are trying to help people get through their inboxes, you have to think about the worst person in the world who would be reading the inbox. And that could be me, which is ADHD. And so if you put, okay, let's just talk about the length of the email. So if you put like end of day today, but you put it at the end, I'm not seeing that. And then here's another thing. My people started to do this review now, or not review now, but like, please review. And that's it. Like, please review. And then here's this like long, a line on what it is to review. Well, so if I see please review like 10 times, I'll just not review any of them because my brain is weird. Like it's trained to ignore things that I continuously see because it's not important. And now, is that odd or what?
Well, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, Amy. And I think one issue there, I think, is what outcome do they actually want from you?
Well, as the
Review.
editor, let's just pretend I'm an editor, which half the time I am.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God. And then it's like, so I need to sit around and edit right now. And I also, my problem in PR and all of our problem is we have to bill per client. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, so I have to think, oh, now I have to work on this client now to edit this. Now I have to switch to this client. And so it's not all, it's not anyway. And I'm sure all jobs are hard, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just me, but I guess the question is how long of a subject line is okay?
Yeah, good question. So I usually recommend 8 to 10 words, and this is about where your inbox is going to cut off that subject line. I think if you can get the job done in fewer, that's really great, but you don't necessarily get bonus points for only using 2 words,
So
right?
then 8 to 10, because I'm thinking, do you know what, and if you don't know, it's okay, but what's the platform that the majority of people are looking at their email on? Is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really split in my experience between Outlook and Gmail. Yeah, and it does make a difference, right? Because the configuration of your inbox in Gmail versus the configuration of your inbox in Outlook, it's completely different. And the functionality of those two programs are different as well. So yeah, it's pretty split in my
Yeah, because I'm
experience.
literally looking at my inbox, it's Gmail,
Hmm.
and I am seeing like these things. I guess it depends on how big you have it open. I mean, so this stuff is huge for PR people because we're all we do is send media pitches. And
Yeah.
so I always talk about the subject line, but I haven't not ever really talked about the preview line. And
Hmm.
so I'm
Hmm.
looking at my inbox thinking, like, where does the preview line get cut off? Well, it depends on how I'm looking at my email. And
Yes, absolutely.
and then what to say about the preview line? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think like I pulled up my inbox too so I could look at it. It's a dangerous game we're playing, Amy,
I
because
know.
we're gonna see all
You get
these requests come
really
in that
distracted.
yeah, that we need to respond to. Yeah, I'm in Gmail as well, though I also have Outlook on my computer. And yeah, what I'm seeing, and there are all these different configurations even within Gmail, and whether it's like, I forget what words they use for it, but it's like you can have X number of you can have it like the skinny, really skinny bars. So it's kind of like
Mhm.
smushed together and you can see more at once, or it can be more spread out.
Mhm.
Anyway, the way mine works right now is where the subject line ends. So let's say it's 5 words, the preview text begins, and then there's more preview text. But let's say your subject line is 10 words, that's where the preview text begins and you have fewer preview text words, if that makes sense. So it's like a total
Mhm.
number of words or characters for both of them combined. I don't know if that's what yours looks like too. And
Yeah, and
so, yeah,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. Yeah, so I think that the key is to think about the relationship between your subject line and your preview text. And there are two mistakes that I see people make a lot with preview text is one, they'll repeat information that
Mhm.
that you're already getting from the sender name or the subject line. So
Mhm.
they'll, if it's from Grace Aldridge Foster, reaching out about podcast. And then in the preview text, it said, hi, Amy, this is Grace from the podcast recording. I'm reaching out to ask you a question about the podcast. I'm just repeating the same information over and over.
Mhm.
So I'm
Mhm.
kind of wasting that space or wasting that opportunity to catch your attention or to go ahead and clue you in to what it is that you're going to need to do to respond to that email.
Mhm.
So don't repeat the same information over and over in your preview text. And then the other thing that I see all the time is people front load their emails with pleasantries.
Okay. See, I was gonna go into that. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And so people ask me all the time, well, is a pleasantry bad? Well, no, of course not. I mean, it's important to convey to your colleagues and your clients and other people that they're humans and you're a human, and it's important to build rapport with people. So I'm not anti pleasantry, but what happens, especially if you have a long or elaborate pleasantry, is that it takes up your preview text. And
Well,
especially,
even I hope you're doing well will take up the preview text. So that's not.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how do you do a short one? What do you say instead?
Yeah. So, two things. I'll do things like, Happy Tuesday or
Mm,
hi there, or even, and of course, exclamation points are a divisive issue, but sometimes I'll even use, an exclamation point after hi, Amy, so I can go ahead and dive right in, but you get a little bit of the sense of the tone, that I'm using. It's a friendly, upbeat tone, even though I'm going straight into a request or an ask. So you could do that. Yeah, I love to do like hey there, or, happy Monday, something like that. But the other thing that you can do is just move your pleasantry to the bottom of your email. It's not always about shortening it or getting rid of it. Sometimes it's about just not putting it at the top of your email.
mhm,
And then you don't see it in the preview text. So someone doesn't immediately see that pleasantry from you. But I think as
mhm,
long as someone opens your email, and if it's not too long, they're not having to scroll, when they kind of take a quick glance at that email, they get that first impression, they're going to notice it. They're going to notice the pleasantry. They're going to notice that you're being friendly or polite. And I think it's still going to serve
hmm.
the same purpose.
Yeah, so because we pitch the press, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we always talk about, first of all, I agree with you. Number one,
Mm-hmm.
completely. But, I don't know everything, right? And so I can't just say, do this to people. So
Sure.
we talk a lot about how we have to be nice. No, it's not about that. It's about we have to have relationships with the press, and we're not just
Yes.
trying to pitch them. And so, especially during COVID, um, some people thought it was important to say, like, I hope you're doing well and all this, which, because it's a hard time and all that. And so it was like,
Sure.
okay, fine, do it. But now maybe we should just not do that anymore. But it's hard because people want to say, oh, I hope you're doing well, and it's like, because if you leave it down at the bottom, you don't know that they'll actually see it. So that's why people lead at the top with that.
No, that's very true. And gosh, I have so many things to say about that. First of all, the pleasantries during the pandemic, the early days of the pandemic got wild. I hope that you're not drowning in existential angst during these
Mhm,
unprecedented and difficult times. I mean, they got more
mhm,
and more elaborate. And I think that for a while that was really important,
mhm,
to kind of acknowledge that these are unusual circumstances. We're all kind of doing the best we can. That was important. But I think you're right that it's no longer quite as important to do that, to be as elaborate about that. Times um, have begun changing
mhm,
a little bit. But you also talked about something that you brought up something that we haven't talked about yet, which is this idea of relationships, of forming
mhm,
relationships. And so a lot of this, I mentioned earlier, this idea about judgment when it
mhm,
comes to sending emails. So I think that there isn't a one size fits all approach. I think it's essential to understand your audience. What relationship do you have with them, if any? And then adjust your approach accordingly. Sometimes a really specific and well phrased, a well chosen and well phrased pleasantry is the strategic thing to do.
mhm,
That is the thing to put in your preview text. I just think that you should always have a reason for doing what you're doing in your writing,
mhm,
in your emails. So anytime you're doing something by default, question that. Does that
mhm.
actually work for your audience? Is that actually accomplishing anything for you? Is there a different strategy you could take that would be more effective? And kind of approach it that way.
Okay. And then any last thoughts on email etiquette? I think, we are, because this ties into that, but anything else with that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna turn the tables a little bit, Amy, and put you on the spot. Do you have an email pet peeve when it comes to email etiquette? Is there a strong preference that you have, or something that you really dislike? Like, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, well, I think right now it's just, it's really not about email. It's really about research because people are
Mm.
sending me things. It's so funny. It's a lot of junk email that I get, and they're sending me things that I actually offer as a service sometimes. Or meaning like, hey, would you like some PR? It's like, well,
Yeah.
that's what I do. And it's also like, um, I'm not going to refer any SEO or website development lead to a stranger. I have enough friends in
Yeah.
that space. But that has not, because to me, that doesn't have anything to do with email. It has to do with the front end work of the research.
Well, and it has to do with research about their audience. I mean, they haven't, they're sending out sort of like the same maybe cold email to different people. The fact that they're asking, they're offering you PR when that's what you do or whatever. So it's research, but it's also research about who they're communicating with, right? So it's an
Mhm.
audience awareness issue, it seems like.
Mhm. And kind of what's funny about that and what it has trained me to do is sometimes my only aim in getting into my inbox is to delete emails. And I've
Yes.
told people this that I'll also want to do newsletters. Like my freaking favorite thing to do is delete email. So like where you can do it all at once, like delete them. So
Yeah.
just saying. So I mean,
Yes.
well, this is really random. Sorry, I didn't ask about etiquette really, but do you think the age of the email newsletter is dead because of that?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, personally, I think it's not because I actually still read some and find a lot of value in them. So I think it comes down to value. Is this providing me value, and is it easy for me to use and read? And if so, it still works.
Okay.
I think using them just because you're supposed to, having one just because someone
Mhm.
told you 10 years ago that you're supposed to have one, that's not a good enough reason to do that anymore. But I
Mm.
think if you're providing value and you're making it you're making it an easy experience for your readers, you're offering something that they need and that they want. I mean, that still has a place in our inboxes.
Okay. And then anything else to say on email etiquette since I kind of just took it into a different direction?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that what I recommend when we work with client organizations, what I recommend is, you need to also have internal conversations about email etiquette because actually different industries, different organizations, different teams have different preferences. And what we find is that most teams have never had kind of like a formal discussion about how do we email here? What is typical for us? What is best practice for us? And there are very few, blanket best practices. So what I like to do, and I think we have a guide I could send you, Amy, about this. You're welcome to share in the notes
Sure.
or
Yeah.
something, which is
Mhm.
just a list of questions that we encourage managers or other people to actually ask their teams about to help them align on email etiquette internally because it's not about my pet peeves or your pet peeves. It's about what works best for us as a team or as a company or in our industry, what works for our audience. And most people just have never actually formally aligned on that, and new hires almost never know exactly what's expected or what's typical for email culture at an organization. And there's just often not like a there's no preparation for how to onboard someone in that way.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that's really important to think about. I mean, there are certainly email etiquette things that I recommend. I think are important. For example, rather than sending emails late at night, just send it for the next morning. At
Mm.
9 a.m. There are
Mhm.
some things that I think are general best practices, and that I recommend frequently. But the thing that will make the most impact is if internally teams actually align on their expectations and preferences for email etiquette.
Yeah, and if people could also say that we don't need to respond to emails right away because it
Yes.
will be kind of a sloppy email. We want to take time to think about it and then prepare a good response.
Yes, think before you send. And people ask me a lot of times, like, is it true that you need to respond to emails within 24 hours? And I say that Yes, I think it is professional to respond to an email, or let me put it this way, to acknowledge an email within 24 hours, but you can take longer to give a thoughtful response if you need that. Right. So I might email someone and say, "Oh, thank you so much for your message. Noted. I'm going to talk to my team about this or whatever, and I'll get back to you soon with a
Mhm.
response." Right.
Mhm.
Like you can acknowledge someone's email, but still take the time you need to get back to them with a thoughtful response rather than waiting, 2 weeks before you even acknowledge the email.
Mhm. Yeah, and because if you feel like you have to acknowledge everything right, well, not acknowledge, but if you feel like you have to give a good response right away, this is an instance of letting your inbox rule your to-do list or rule your day,
Yes.
which is not okay.
Absolutely not. Yeah, and that's a whole other topic too is how to take control of your own inbox, how to develop better inbox management habits. And I definitely think it's important to have established times throughout the day that you check email. I know sometimes, like if you're in a crisis management situation, for example, or journal as a journalist or something, it can be tough. You can't ignore your email inbox for long. But even if it's just, I'll check my email at the top of every hour for 5 minutes, and then it's done. I'll check it
Mhm.
again an hour later. I mean, there's almost nothing that can't wait an hour. Or in my case, and in the case for a lot of professionals, there's almost nothing that can't wait 4 hours. So maybe check your email at 9 a.m., 12 p.m., and 4 p.m., and that's it.
Yeah, and
Um,
honestly, if there's something that can't wait, then you probably need to get on the phone. I mean,
yes,
even the sender
yes,
of the email, like, shouldn't be sending the email maybe. They should text or call.
exactly. I think email is not the appropriate format for urgent communication usually.
Mhm. Yeah, and then last thing, speaking of, different industries and email etiquette, I mean, some industries still use the phone, and so and it's important for PR people working at firms to know which ones that ours is so that we can, work the way they're used to working, and so, like, in real estate, people still pick up the phone, which is great because it's sometimes faster.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. Yep, that's so true.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate this. And I'm sure there's a lot more we could learn, but we'll share all of your resources and your workshops online or in the show notes. So if there's anything else that I'm missing or that I didn't ask, let me know.
I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Amy. I really appreciate you having me. This was a fun conversation.
Thank you for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.